So again, a warm welcome to you all. People are still arriving, so it's good we haven't begun yet. Wait a few moments till everybody gets their seats. So I'd just like to begin by welcoming all of you and thanking Jai Jagannath for being here, for being willing to offer this class. I have not had that much good fortune to be in many of his classes or to be in circles with him. But what I have experienced with Jai Jagannath has been deeply meaningful to me. It has always left me a different person than I was when I first arrived. And I highly value that, and I value his input. And to me, Jai Jagannath is like the live edge. He is like the personification of evolution, and always growing, always cutting into new places, always digging deeper. So I have no idea what is going to come during this class. Neither does he. And that is the beauty of his willingness to go wherever that edge cuts. So we're very fortunate to be here with all of you, with everyone that has joined, and your energy is going to add to this event. Even though it's online and we're not in person, being able to experience each other's energy bouncing off of each other, we can still try to do that in this interesting kind of linear network circle. So thank you all very much, and I'll be quiet now and turn it over to Jai Jagannath.
Radhesham. Thank you, Bhakti Rasa. She asked me if I had a bio which to share, and I said whatever is meaningful for her is a sufficient enough bio for me. And it was a very heart-touching bio. And also within it was woven words of pacification, because I just shared with her how I feel very awkward in talking in these sorts of spaces. In recent times, I haven't felt very empowered to make a presentation where the sort of energetic ethic is very vertical. So it's like you're the person who's intended to like enlighten the audience, and the audience is intended to receive that enlightenment. I felt a lot more comfortable where there's like a circle and a dialectic between all the members, where everyone's kind of equally positioned from the center and everyone's input is meaningful for the collective group. I felt a lot more safe and comfortable in that sort of context. And I was sharing with her my awkwardness and trepidations about this sort of energetic ethic. Plus, it's made more challenging by the fact that this is like an online space. And she gave me words of pacification before you all arrived. And her bio was also woven words of pacification and encouragement. So I'm very grateful for that, Bhakti Rasa, and grateful to be with all of you. The title of the presentation is The Halo Field, which is a horrible title. When Padmanabha Maharaj asked me to do a presentation, we were brainstorming what should be the topic. And I gave a particular topic which he wasn't quite satisfied with. And then he said, well, why don't you talk about circle work? Because in the spaces that I've shared with you over the last year, it's been a lot of just circle work. So I was like, okay, we'll talk about circle work and how I conceive of that and how that conception has impacted my own personal and psychological experience of devotion. So I was looking for a cool name for circle. So I went to Word Hippo, which is like a thesaurus online. It's a really good thesaurus. And I was looking at different words for circle, and halo was there. And I was like, okay, yeah, halo. But after I shared the title with Padmanabha Maharaj, I was utterly disappointed, and I thought he might even change it, but he didn't. So the halo field is a terrible name, but the idea is it's a circle of light. And you can think of it like a circle of light, of constant, like regenerative light. And the idea that I had with the image of a circle and the image of the halo is that life, the natural life cycle, could be represented diagrammatically as a circle. So if you take the natural world, you know, per our metaphysics, the natural world is composed of three gunas: rajas, sattva, and tamas. And so this natural world can be represented diagrammatically as a circle, where you have rajas, you have genesis from rajas at one phase of the circle. And then you have sattva, or sustenance, informed by sattva at another phase of the circle. And then you have destruction or dissolution by tamas at another phase of the circle before there's regeneration. And this is a natural phases of life in the natural world. And so the natural world, of course, has two divisions, a sort of physical division and a psychic division. And so when you look at the natural world physically or psychically, it moves in these three phases. So take the physical world, you have spring, for example, just giving examples. You have spring at the generation phase, and then summer at the sustenance phase. And then fall is starting to, you know, fall off. And then winter before there's spring again. Another example could be the yuga cycles that are experienced on Varsha, or this earth plane. You have Krita Yuga at the beginning, and then you have a period of sustenance, Treta Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, and then Kali Yuga, like a winter or dissolution period. And so when you look at physical nature, even your body, there's birth of the body, genesis, it sustains for a little period of time, and then there's death. So when you look at the outside world, it is self-evident that nature moves in this cycle. What we don't always think about, but also experience necessarily, is that psychic nature also moves in this pattern. So psychic nature, you have, for example, the genesis of an ego. I'll use the example of just being born and thinking oneself a child, you know, birth. That's as much a psychic identity as it is a physical reality as well. And then you have adolescence for a period of time. And then the period from adolescence to adulthood represents like the death of adolescence, and then entering into a new period of life, adulthood, you know, and that's like regenerated life. And then you have adulthood that lasts for a period of time, and then midlife crisis. It's true, midlife crisis does exist. It's really true. And then that's another period of death or loss egoically. And then, you know, if you survive that period, then you enter into, like, let's say, old age. This is just a natural movement of the psychic patterns of life. I'll give another example. I joined the ashram when I was 18. I won't say how long I've been a Hare Krishna because y'all started doing calculations, but I joined the ashram when I was 18. And that was the death of a particular ego, the secular ego that saw me as a trained dancer pursuing, you know, worldly goals. That was the death of that ego, and it was the birth of this new ego, which was a brahmacharya. And I remained in the ashram for a period of time, because we don't want the calculations going on in the back of the mind. I remained in the ashram for a period of time, and then I left the ashram somewhat unceremoniously. And that was the death of that brahmacharya ego, and then the entry into a new phase of life, a phase of life that in some ways I feel that I'm still under. And so I'm like at this sort of bottom phase, egoically speaking, of the natural pattern of life. And I'm kind of waiting the reemergence of a new type of ego that's life-giving, personally, and also generative for the environment around me. So anyway, these are some certain examples to show that this is the natural pattern of life, and it can be represented or visualized diagrammatically as a circle with these three phases at play. So the tagline of the presentation, so that's the title, the Halo Field, terrible title, but it's meant to talk about this aspect of how to think about the natural pattern of life in this world, the natural pattern that you will experience in this world, physically and also psychically. So the tagline of the title, Egocide, A Glass Darkly, and the naked now. I love that part. I was like, I should have just named it that. I thought that was a really good tagline. The tagline is meant to represent or speak to the egoic, the experience of the egoic pattern of the natural cycle. Egocide, a glass darkly, and the naked now. Before I unpack that tagline, I like to say that in ancestral cultures, they would kind of follow the natural pattern of psychic life, of nature's natural pattern of psychic life, by crafting rites of passage. And rites of passage are also usually represented diagrammatically as a circle. And the first phase of a rite of passage is a separation from the sustenance domain, the domain that is familiar, that is known, that is comfortable, that is normative, status quo. There's a separation from that domain of life, and you're brought into a dissolution phase. So what was normative, the status quo, you're separated forcibly by tribe members, and you're brought into a sort of a death plane. They're going to put to death that particular type of ego. And so you're brought into this sort of dissolution phase of that ego in a rite of passage. You know, the ones that are studied the most by anthropologists are adolescent to adulthood rites of passage. And so the child will be forcibly ripped from his mother's arms or home, brought into like a wilderness, surrounded by all the elders in the village, and specific conscious wounds would be given to the initiate. And so why? Because in order for him to evolve, in order for his ego as a man to be generated, and him to sort of embrace the hardships and the normative responsibilities of this new psychic pattern, the old thing had to be put to death, essentially. And so in the rite of passage, they would bring the boy into a specific space, and certain wounds would be consciously given to the initiate to put to death that particular type of ego, so that this new ego, the man ego, can emerge, and then he can return to the village, you know, as a generative man, not only for himself, but also for his people. And so the rites of passage, mimicking the natural world and its processes, also have three patterns: the stage of separation. They give different names to it, but the stage of separation, the stage of initiation at the low point, and then the stage of return, where there's the birth of the new ego, the generative man. Sometimes these states are also called the liminal space or preliminal space, the liminal space, and then the post-liminal space. The word liminal means like threshold. So that's where all the stuff's going to go down, in the liminal space. This is the dark world, so to speak. And so before that, you have the preliminal, where you're like, la-di-da, everything is good, everything is normative, everything is familiar, everything's comfortable. You're forced out of that, past a threshold, into the liminal space, where you're initiated consciously by the members of your tribe. And then after it is, if you survive it, and that if has always made me uncomfortable. What do you mean if? Like, don't they ensure that there's survival? If you survive the liminal phase, then you're able to enter into the post-liminal world, where the post-liminal world is just a world that you had already come from, but now you see it with new eyes because you've been regenerated through the process of initiation. So the ancestral world had a certain wisdom that nature anyway moves in this pattern, and let us assist the psychic part of this pattern. And the reason for the necessity for the assist is because on the psychic level or interiorly, you can actually resist the natural process. So the soul, you know, this is a good technical word for this group, but the soul is tadatmic with the body, right? The soul and the body are actually different from each other, but we're all mixed up together. So there's literally no meaning viscerally of saying that you're not the body. That's just for the classes. You're not the body. And it's actually very helpful for creating a little bit of distance interiorly so that you can process and engage with the natural world with proper perspective, and don't lose the fullness of yourself specifically don't lose your soul to the world. The teaching is for that sort of proper posture to externals. But as far as the visceral experience of life, you saying you're not the body doesn't mean anything, because you're tadatmic with the body. And so you're not able to really pinpoint where the body ends and the soul begins. You know, sometimes the New Agers, they'll do this thing about like, where does the universe, is it like this? Where does the universe, like if you point your finger out, where does the universe or your finger end and the universe begin? Is that like the saying? New Agers, whatever. That's a good thing. You know, when I was a young Hare Krishna, we'll make fun of these guys for this sort of stuff. But I'm like, you know what? They got a point. Like, because the body is also cosmic. It's a microcosm, and the universe might be a macrocosm, but it's also cosmic. So where does our finger end and the universe begin? So in the same way, because the soul is tadatmic with the psychic body, you can't really say where the body and psyche ends and the soul begins. There's no way to actually ascertain that. Even through even through intellectual acuity, you will not be able to ascertain that. Viscerally, you in fact are this body, but because you are a soul different from the body simultaneously, there is need for the soul to be assisted through the natural psychic patterns of life. And so, in other words, the soul has a capacity to resist initiation. By nature, by nature, we have the capacity to resist that. I'll give just to give an example to flesh this point out visually or imaginally in the mind. When I decided to join the ashram, you know, at 18, I was a trained dancer. I was kind of making a little bit of headway. I mean, you know, I was like making progress. I wasn't one of those people who had like a broken life and therefore I wanted to embrace the Hare Krishna movement. As far as what I saw, I was like fulfilling dreams. I was on my way to New York. I was about to go to a university and train with Alvin Ailey, which is like this kind of famous Black company and in the States. So I was like, I'm moving on up. But I had a particular moment where I made a decision to leave that behind and, you know, pursue love, and basically to pursue love and to pursue Krishna. And so I dropped my my 10-year dedication to dance and pursuit of career and embraced the Hare Krishna movement. My mom was, of course, livid, you know, you can only imagine. And of course, I had to preach to her. That didn't go good either. So when I joined the Hare Krishna movement, I often reflected why the transition was so smooth for me. Like, I entered into the ashram. It was a beautiful experience. I can say I loved every moment of it, but I don't regret any moment of it. It was absolutely like wonderful. Reflecting on it retrospectively, it was because I didn't resist that transition. There was no resistance for the soul for that transition. It was actually an embrace of death. I embraced the death of that secular ego and the life of the devotional ego that was forming in me. Later on, when I left the ashram, as I mentioned, I left the ashram somewhat unceremoniously. And it was also a time of initiation, but it wasn't a time of initiation that was consciously appreciated. And so there was interior resistance to what was naturally taking place universally in the psyche. And as a result of that resistance, the effect interiorly of that resistance was like profound levels of resentment and stagnation. Because not able to let go of the ego that had been normative and status quo and comfortable and what I thought I was going to live my life out all the way to the end. I couldn't let it go. And so nature was like, no, we're already on the move. You got to keep up. You got to keep pace. But I couldn't let it go. So as a result of not letting go, the interior impact was just frustration, anger, resentment, and most importantly, stagnation. And so you're like in the process of transformation, but because you're resisting it, you're coming out deformed instead of like reformed. That's basically the in fact. It wasn't until 3 years later, after I'm in this situation, I'm becoming deformed, literally deformed. And for me, it was a very painful experience. Also, of course, it's grief worthy. It was also very strange for me on a feeling level because I'm a pretty happy-go-lucky guy, in my estimation. Although a lot of my seniors probably would not describe me as such. because I give them headaches. But on a personal level, I'm a pretty happy-go-lucky guy, and so I couldn't, and I don't have in this particular life, anger isn't exactly a energy that I'm confronted with often. And so it was like this deep anger, and which resulted in stagnation. I couldn't understand where it was coming from. And it wasn't until 3 years later where I read this book by Joseph Campbell called The Hero with a Thousand Faces, where he's talking about the natural pattern of life and what I've basically been giving voice to here, that it just opened up. It gave me like a conceptual framework and also language by which all the medicine that was intended to reach me 3 years before could finally be opened up and enter inside my psyche and actually do its work. And then I remember immediately after reading that book, I remember all my resentment just like evaporating, almost magically, just evaporated. I started to feel actual affection for my initiating priests, who I think were unconscious also, as I was also unconscious as an initiate. I started to feel affection for most of them. There was one of them where I was like, I still kind of hate him, but it went from like hate to like neutrality. Because my hate for this one individual was very heavy, but it went from like hate to like neutral. But for everyone else, there was like a genuine, almost affection. And I realized at that moment, retrospectively, that the difference between joining the ashram at 18 and leaving the ashram later on was that in the first instance, I had embraced death essentially and embraced life through embracing the death of the secular ego and embracing the devotional ego. Whereas when nature and God asked me to move forward from that devotional ego, it is also a false ego. And we'll try to flesh that out a little bit more here, but it is also a false ego until it's a fully realized state. I wasn't ready to let go of it. I wasn't ready to embrace death. And as a result of not allowing something to die, the fruit of that resisting death is that everything becomes stagnant and degenerative and deformed. So that this is anyway, because this other point, because the soul is tadatmic with the body, right? You don't know where the body ends and the soul begins. The soul has a capacity in tandem with the body to resist certain psychic processes. And the result of that resistance is essentially stagnation spiritually. And so, okay, so with that information in place, let's go back to Egocide, a glass darkly and the naked now. So the ancestral world, they try to create a circle and a rite of passage for initiates in order to assist them through the psychic pattern of life, which is it's as tremendous, if not more tremendous, in the physical transformations, because the world that you live in day to day is the world of psyche. You know, you don't live like I'm in Vermont at the moment. I don't live in Vermont. I live up in here all day, every day, you know? That's where I actually live on a day-to-day moment. And so when you lose things in the outer world, it can be a tremendous event that can be negative or positive depending on how you take it. But when things are changing in here deeply, it's in a lot of ways, it's more numinous and more profound and even more painful than physical transformations. And so there's a need for assistance in the processes of psychic transformation. In the ancestral world, they had the wisdom to assist their tribes in these psychic transformations, a wisdom that we've lost, and we're seeing the negative fruits of that loss today. Okay, so Egocide. I'm trying to unpack this thing. So because the soul's capacity to resist death is there, at least in the old world, giving this image of like the adolescent to adulthood rites of passage, they kind of like forced you into death. It wasn't like hey, you want to sign up for ego death today? It was like we grab you, we snatch you out the house, and you get initiated, whether you like it or not. I get an intuitive sense that people in the village, the young also, they kind of knew it was coming. They just didn't know when it was coming. And so, and of course, the elders of the village, they knew it was going to happen. And so there's a lot of consciousness in the experience, even though you don't know the exact date of the experience. You're grabbed and you're kind of like, no, like, dang it, like the day has come, and the conscious priests are there. They're giving you wounds consciously. And because everything is being received consciously, it has its medicinal effect and it has its regenerative impact because it's largely everything and everyone is conscious in the process to more or less degrees. In the postmodern world, because we don't have the container of like a tribe that's assisting us with these psychic processes, the ego death experience has to be one that is taken up by the individual consciously, largely, because we just don't have yet the container. And I want to speak to this also. And so for this reason, I use the word egocide instead of ego death. Because suicide, of course, is like a person choosing to try to end their life. That's a horrible thing that does take place when people lose their grip on meaning in life. So egocide, like a choice to embrace the death of a certain way of being, a certain ego. It was a very carefully selected word. Instead of saying ego death, which can be forced upon you by a particular event or the tribe members forcing you into ego death can be forced upon you. And in fact, ego death is forced upon everyone at some point in the natural cycle of life. But because we can resist it, the need for the word egocide came up. Egocide is meant to consciously say that this is a conscious embrace of this psychic pattern of life. I'm consciously embracing death, as difficult as it may be. So you're at that first threshold. You're going from the sustenance world to the dissolution world now, the world of death psychically. When you enter into that dissolution world, the experience there is a glass darkly. A glass darkly, I think, is a phrase that comes from the Bible, and it refers to where your faculties that you normally use to live out the normative pattern of life are obfuscated. Right. So like in our metaphysics, you have the buddhi, you have the manas, you have the indriya, the senses, and so on, that help us like at least have the sense that we're in control of things. With these faculties, you can put your life into a certain sort of order. You can think about your existence in a certain way where you feel like safe and secure and confident and so on. When you enter into the dissolution world, though, a glass darkly takes place. It means that the faculties lack clarity in that space. They don't know what's happening, what's going on, what's the solution to things. They maybe not even able to tell what exactly is the problem. It's a glass dark. The experience is almost of the impotency of your faculties when you enter into that space. So this happens, of course, for, again, all people who are entering into this pattern, and also for religious people, this takes place as well. Your faculties become useless when you're entering into the dissolution world. And all of a sudden, your buddhi, so buddhi is the intellectual faculty, your Bhagavad Gita verses ain't cutting it. The Bhagavatam verses ain't cutting it. Them classes that you loved so much ain't cutting it anymore. It's like all the manas is the emotional world. I used to get so much like energy from like the jolly kirtan and the banter with the devotees, ain't cutting it anymore. The senses, and their touch of objects, even the Krishnized objects, prasadam, too much oil. Just like something that you normally would totally love and be ecstatic, suddenly the senses can't connect. You go and see the deity, a glass darkly, and you're like, I don't know, is the deity even real? Like, is this, maybe this is idol worship? All of a sudden, the faculties that were informed by so much light in the normative phase of life, the status quo phase, in the dissolution world become completely and utterly useless, which is required for the generation of new life and a new ego that's useful for the world that you're being invited to, the world that you're going to have to participate in. But when you're in that phase of life, you don't see that and you don't appreciate it necessarily. And that is a phase of life that is very hard to navigate. In some ways, people in that phase not appreciating this pattern of life may just think, I'm thinking about devotional sanghas. They may think, oh, this is, I'm falling down, or maybe my apparas have cut me off, or Krishna consciousness doesn't work. These are like normative thoughts that can come up in this dissolution phase of life. You don't appreciate that this might be the pattern of life that's happening and that you're being invited into a new way of being. You start to think in this way and you might get cut off. So it's kind of like a dangerous period of life again, and it's only dangerous because the soul being tadatmic with this process, it can resist it interiorly. It can be resisted. And so a glass darkly, the darkening of your faculties that normally allow you to have a sense of control and a sense of direction and a sense of meaning, they suddenly become dark. And now you're not able to navigate this world. If you survive that stage, and how to survive that, we want to speak to that a little bit. Then you come to the naked now. If you survive, especially at the lowest point in that process, if somehow you have an epiphanal event and you realize it's taking place and you're able to integrate all the work that's going on in this process, you take birth again. But the birth happens while you're still in the dark. The birth is happening while you're still in the dark. So now you're naked, and you're having to relate even to the old world, but in a new way. And so it's a naked now because it's very vulnerable. You don't actually know exactly how to relate, and you're needing to like relearn basically how to adapt even to the old world that you're accustomed to. You need to learn how to readapt to that because you're naked now. You're absolutely vulnerable. You're like raw and tender. I can speak on my own process a little bit here where I feel like I'm in a naked now phase where some integration has taken place and a new whatever it is being born. It's somewhat self-evident, even the way that I dress and so on. At least from saffron to this, it's a big change. And you're kind of in the naked now. I have this experience where I'm from ISKCON Sangha, generally speaking, going to ISKCON spaces is extremely difficult for me. I don't know how to relate. Like when I'm in Govardhan, I spent my Guru Maharaj, ISKCON Guru, beloved Guru of mine. He was concerned about me spending so much time in Govardhan because he didn't know who was I associating with. And I said, don't worry, I don't associate with anybody. I said, the whole Gaudiya Sangha, I'm so raw and tender right now, and I'm needing to learn how to adapt to this, whatever this new thing is coming, and whatever this world is that I might be expected to relate to again. I'm needing to relearn that. I'm like a child now, like a newborn baby boy that's naked and extremely vulnerable, extremely raw, extremely tender. And so I have to like step carefully as I'm learning the new ways of this identity and how it relates to the new world, hopefully in a generative way. So this is this tagline, Egocide, a glass darkly in the naked now, is meant to kind of give a short rubric that explains the different phases of the psychic experience of this natural pattern of life. Okay, that's the title. I have one other major point to make here. This is maybe a lot of information already. I always do a little bit overkill. Like, my notes are like several pages long. I'm literally only on the second major note on my thing. So won't get through everything, but there's one other major point that should be said here. With the life of a jiva in devotion. This is the last major piece here. The life of the jiva, as it's told by Kaviraj Goswami in chapter 19 of Chaitanya Charitamrita, the teachings of Mahaprabhu to Rupa Goswami. We hear about the implantation of the seed of faith into the heart of the jiva by the guru. First, we hear about what a jiva is, Swangsha, Vibhinamsha, the jiva is Vibhinamsha, he is the Paramatma Shakti of Bhagavan. We hear all this sort of technical information. Then we hear about the journey of the jiva in the material world, first to an animal species. Later on, he may become a karmakandi. Later on, he may become a Gyani. Later on, he may become a perfected Gyani. And out of millions and millions of perfected Gyanis, one may become a devotee of Lord Narayana. And this sort of journey is painted by Kaviraj Goswami. Well, how does that take place? And then this famous verse comes, Brahmanda Brahmite Koma Bhagyava Jiva, that if the jiva is very fortunate, then he gets the Bhakti Lata Bija, the seed of the creeper of love. So the seed is planted into the jiva. This seed image is very important here. And because a seed in life is planted in darkness, right? And it is in darkness that the seed begins to blossom and grow. And so the seed of bhakti is planted into like this pure potentiality or darkness. Pure potentiality is represented as darkness in all ancestral traditions. In our tradition, we call it pradhan, right? Pradhan is the state of nature and its equilibrium. It's complete darkness. Before the light of sattva emerges, it's complete darkness. And out of that potential of the equilibrated, that's not a word. Out of that darkness of the modes and equilibrium emerges the cosmos. In Christianity, they call pradhan the face of the deep. And God breathes over the face of the deep, and by his breath, all the potentialities of nature emerge. So all ancestral cultures, they have pretty much the same sort of imagery of darkness and the emerging out of darkness. So darkness, although in the Western psyche today, people think of darkness as like evil and negative, darkness also represents potentiality for a lot of the ancestral cultures. It is the plane of pure potentiality. And so the jiva comes in contact with sadhu sangha, the guru, and the guru, sadhu sangha, plants the seed inside this potential that's there. It's like dark though, and because the potential can go for better or for worse, but they plant the seed in this plane of pure potentiality. So try to imagine it in this circle. At the lowest point, they're planting the seed, and from there, the seed will begin. The lata will begin to grow. Okay, so you have, so then as the story unfolds in our normal telling of the story, you have the seed of faith, and then from faith, you do sadhu sangha, which in Rupa Goswami's context, it means guru padashraya, taking shelter of the guru. You know the verse, adhal shraddha tata sadhu sangha, etc. So adhal means sadhu sangha. Although mostly this one is skipped over, the word adhal also means sadhu sangha. There are two sadhu sanghas. So the first sadhu sangha happens at the stage of adhal. In the beginning, you meet sadhus and you hear from them, and from that hearing, you get shraddha, the seed of faith. Then you do sadhu sangha again, that is guru padashraya. Then from there, you do bhajan kriya, then anartha nivritti, nishta ruchi asakti prema, right? This is the general story of afflorescence that we hear in Gaudiya Vaishnavism. And imaginally, when we picture it, we think it's going to be like, oh, how beautiful. I'm like, I don't know. I have a doubt these days. Just personally, I don't know how beautiful it's probably beautiful retrospectively when you can reflect upon it, but in real moment time, it's probably not as beautiful as you imagine it to be, just experientially or emotionally. So, okay, so you have the seed is planted, and the general story is, the afflorescence of devotion in this way, right? So you can try to, I should have diagrams for this, but my gesticulation is going to have to be sufficient. It was moving up in this direction. So before you got that seed, your ego is at the high point of the circle. It's absolute. And as bhakti is afflorescing, the ego is descending. So I hope you can see this. You can kind of get this image that's taking place. As the bhakti that's planted here in the soil of pure potential is afflorescing, what's happening to the ego is it's actually going into a state of descent or destruction, ultimately utter destruction. In order for the victory of bhakti to take place, there's a sort of shedding off of layers of ego. Now, where I got this idea from is from Sri Vishwanath's Madhurya Kadambini. It's a very important book for, that's one of the only books that we have where Sri Vishwanath speaks a little bit to what can take place in the unfolding of devotion. I still think we need more books written by contemporary practitioners that really flesh out the messiness of the process of afflorescence. This is just a total aside. We need stories that we can locate ourselves in. And I love the stories of our Nityasiddha acharyas, but I just cannot locate myself in the story. Homeboy came out of the womb writing Sanskrit shlokas. I can't relate to that. I just can't. And his life was like very smooth from there on out. I can't find myself in that story. And as a result of that, the Lord of the Rings is going to have to do, that like you have no other option. And so I do think practitioners, we are going to have to tell our stories more as a service to posterity. like the future devotees who are going to need guidance in navigating the process of the growth of bhakti and the sort of, in one sense, the nullification of their normal way of being. We're going to need more of that. In any case, Sri Vishwanath has kindly given something, which is also wonderful. Reading that book for me was like epiphanal in a lot of ways. Like, wow, there's someone who kind of understood to some degree what we would be going through as our devotion was unfolding. In that book, in the third shower, he covers the topic of anartha nivritti. And he talks about nullification in 5 stages. Don't worry about the technical point. This is just to set up the more important point that I'm trying to make. But he talks about the process of nivritti or nullification in 5 stages. I don't remember all the technical language, but like Eka Desha Varshini, Bahu Desha Varshini, Prayiki, Purna, and Antyantiki. So, you have like a slight nullification, a more comprehensive nullification. Prayiki, it's almost complete. Purna, it's complete, but there's a little chance to return. And absolute nullification, where there's no chance to return. This is how he talks about the process of nullification that takes place as bhakti is progressing. Okay, that point in place. In the last section of the last shower of that book, he talks about the development of bhakti as the sort of victory of a devotional ego and destruction of a material ego, which he doesn't elaborate on it very deeply, but I found that section to be the most meaningful for me reading it over the years. That it's going back to this image, the seed is planted and bhakti is progressing through these different stages. This is the only story that we see or that we hear about in our Sangha, this story from Shraddha to Prema. And it sounds all very beautiful, or at least we imagine it to be so. But in Sri Vishwanath's analysis, he says, as this is blossoming or efflorescing, what happens to the ego, he says the false ego is antyantiki, is absolute before the contact with bhakti. And then as bhakti is ascending, then the ego starts to descend. So it goes from purna, it goes from absolute to complete, to almost complete, to comprehensive, to hardly there, to completely destroyed. And so this image that I'm giving right now, this is an important image that I'm doing with my fingers. This is important. This, I should have diagrams, but I don't. Bhakti is moving this way and the ego is moving this way. So this is how it would look if you had to represent it like a wheel. It's moving like this. This is what's happening. And so you can imagine, again, the experience of ego death or egocide is a tremendous emotional experience. It's not one that's exactly, on an emotional level, it's not one that's necessarily beautiful in the way that you can appreciate it in real time. It's usually beautiful in a way that you can appreciate retrospectively after you've survived it, but not in real time. Okay, so this image, one more image to add to these circles. You have the soul. Again, the soul is tadatmic with the body. We've already mentioned that. The soul is also tadatmic with bhakti. So in a sense, the soul who exists inside this thing, there's a confluence of 3 energies. This is why sadhana is a complete mystery, which is the topic that I wanted to talk about. And Prabhupada Maharaj was like, no, do circle work. But sadhana is actually a complete mystery because in a very technical sense, the senses cannot do bhakti. The jiva, in a technical theological sense, cannot do bhakti because bhakti is in a category superior to jiva and superior to the senses. Atashi krishnamani, namavet grahim indriya, etc. So the sadhaka in this world, there's a confluence of 3 energies: the jiva, the body, and bhakti. Like this is a new type of triveni. The triveni in India, where there's the meeting of 3 rivers. This is another type of triveni that happens on a very subtle and spiritual level. The meaning of soul, psyche, and bhakti. And the soul, in a sense, is like, I don't have a better way of articulating it, and its language is always going to be incomplete. But the soul is basically in conversation with these energies. The soul is basically bearing witness. The soul who's a jiva and who's committing to devotion is bearing witness to the ascent of devotion, hopefully, and is being, And if that process is working successfully, he's also bearing witness, or she's also bearing witness, I should say, the soul is Shakti, to the descent of the ego in the other phase. And the experience of that, I'm going to use the word numinous. Numinous means something that inspires awe, and it also inspires fear. Numinous is like something, numinous means an experience that's so tremendous that you almost can't process it. It's like, it's awe-inspiring. An example of a numinous experience would be Krishna saying, in the Gita, he speaks about the universal form like 1,000 suns rising at the same time. And a lot of us like, oh, how beautiful light. I'm like, 1,000 suns? That ain't beautiful. That would be mad scary. There's 1,000 suns suddenly arose in the sky. I would freak out. One sun is already a lot. Beautiful, the beautiful one sun, but there was like two of them or three of them. It would be numinous. It inspire awe, but it will also inspire fear. So the soul who's this bhakti is trying to work in her being, in the body and the psyche, if that is moving in the way that it should, and this is also descending, it's a very numinous experience. And one that is hard to digest. I don't have better language right now. If you're left on your own. So let's go back to Kaviraj Goswami telling the story after these elements are in place. So the seed is planted, and he tells us, Kaviraj Goswami, in telling the story, that the jiva has to take that seed and sow it in his heart. This is why I say it's like the jiva is in a dialectic with bhakti also. But it's not a hostile takeover. There's a communication that's happening between the soul and devotion, so to speak. It's not a hostile takeover. So Kaviraj Goswami says the soul has to tie that seed in his heart, the soil of his heart, the soil of his potential, and it has to water that seed. Now, how does the soul water the seed? By the waters of Shravanam, Kirtanam, etc. This is where the Sadhu Sangha circle comes into play. He has to water the seed by the waters of Shravan, Kirtan, etc. And then he said you should put a fence around that seed. This is Kaviraj Goswami. A fence should be put around the seed to protect from I think in the story, is to protect from the elephant of aparad. That is the way the story is told. So what is the fence? We hear that the fence is Sadhu Sangha. At least in Prabhupada's commentaries, this fence is Sadhu Sangha. So the sadhus are like a fence around the seed of potential. The sadhus in their way of being, and also specifically in their voices, are offering the waters that will allow the seed of devotion to blossom. But again, as the seed of devotion is blossoming, this other thing is happening to the psyche that has been with us since beginningless time. The psyche is literally the most intimate, I'm going to use the word person, the most intimate person that we've ever been with in our entire existence. And now it's being sort of transmogrified. Probably for the psyche is almost like by force. As the soul is in dialectic with this new energy and living for the cause of love and allowing the waters of love through the voices of the sadhus to grow that love in him. What's happening on the psychic level is very tremendous. And perhaps psychically it could be even painful. Just as an aside, I've often heard new devotees. This is always very funny when new devotees who really like invest in bhakti. This is the most common thing you ever hear from them. They're like, I feel like my life is falling apart. It's a very common story amongst. There's some devotees here in the sangha even, where it's like as soon as they decided to really take up bhakti and really like embrace her. Yeah, Ethan, the comments. Embrace her love and embrace her work in you. Immediately, we saw a complete shift in our external environment and also psychically. It's a very common story that takes place. Again, back to this image of the will. It's a very common story. And so in order to hold the numinous experience of the afflorescence of bhakti and the sort of innervation of psyche, which you can really, these are not perfect analogies. They just help. These are meant to give you an intuitive sense of what may be taking place within you. You need a circle of friends to shower the waters of love. You know, we say the waters of Shravanam Kirtan. I'm using the waters of love. Shravanam Kirtan is nothing but another way of saying bhakti, another way of saying love. So that's important for me because not every Shravanam Kirtan is love. You know, take that as you will. I'm not going to explain it further, but not every Shravanam Kirtan is love. That's going to nourish your seed. And so you're surrounded by a circle of friends, essentially showering the waters of love in your seed, but also a fence. You know, let's say I have the image of like ancestors, devotee ancestors. They're like a fence hand in hand around us in order to help us contain the tremendous numinous experience of the victory of love in our heart, which also has its implications for us on the psychic level, which probably will be appreciated retrospectively, but in real time can be it's egocide. It's a glass darkly. It's the naked now, essentially. These are the major images that I wanted to provide in the Sangha. There's so much more to say. My articulation wasn't perfect. It's always really challenging to speak to a new group that you're not familiar with. Of course, there's so many of my friends here. Thank you for coming. But there's so many others that I don't know, and I don't know what resonates with you and how I should use the language. And I'm not as methodical as I like to be because a little bit of nervousness and how to speak meaningfully to a new group. But I have provided the major images that I thought important. I think the Sangha is meant to help us navigate our humanity and our devotion, like that sort of intersection of those two spaces. And so as far as this space being for that ethic, I think what I've spoken has spoken to this work that this Sangha is intended to help us navigate. That, yeah, the victory of love in our heart is beautiful, but its beauty is also numinous. It's awe-inspiring. It's fear-inspiring also. It can break you, especially as you enter into the glass darkly, the dissolution world, and things aren't so familiar. We need our friends. We need our circle of friends who are like initiating priests, showering the waters of love through their songs, you know, their Shravan Kirtan, their songs, their consoling words, their guidance. And we also need their arm, you know, them kind of like arm to arm, helping to contain the numinous experience that is also taking place for us psychically, which is also very tremendous, and it could be even painful. Now, one final point here is because, as I mentioned, it's not a hostile takeover. The soul, just like in the natural world, in its devotional, it can resist. It can resist the movement. And that's why it's like a constant dialectic with love. A constant dialectic with psyche is going on because the soul can resist. It's not like we just step into it with arms wide open. Not usually. And so, yeah, you know, I don't know how to represent it. So I'm using my body to try to represent. The movement is something like this. You're like dancing with love, and you're dancing with psyche, and you're trying to find the flow in that dance, that numinous dance that's taking place within our being. And so all this to say is that if you're having a numinous experience devotionally, psychically, you know, welcome to the show. Welcome to the show. Don't be totally alarmed by it. I know in our Gaudiya Sanghas, often when we feel alienated from our devotion, from our gurus, from our Sangha, from our japa, from our Bhagavatam, whatever it may be, the main story we tell is the story of offense. You must have committed some offenses, and therefore you've been cut off from love. You've been cut off from God. You've been cut off from your Sangha. And I like to say that I'm pretty sure that's a chapter of the book, but it's not the whole story. And the danger of that, in my view, this is a personal opinion, is that a half-truth is more dangerous than a lie, because a half-truth is seductive in a ways that lies aren't necessarily seductive, because it has elements of truth in it. And so the story of offense is certainly an element of that. You know, we commit offenses, we get cut off, whatever. That's not the only, that's not the whole story though. Bhakti is doing her work, God is doing his work in our being. And that also has the tremendous numinous experience of Egocide, a glass darkly, a naked now. And so take this talk a little bit intuitively. I'm trying to flesh out the story and say to our audience that when you're going through it as a devotee, don't be alarmed. All is well. Though you walk through the shadow of the valley of death, you shall fear no evil. Allow the songs of your well wishers and your friends to console you and to guide you through that experience. As you're in the dance dialectic with Psyche and Bhakti for the victory of love in your life. Okay, Radhe Shyam, 1 hour. I did the best I could. Thank you for tolerating me and staying the whole time. This is not, again, the easiest thing for me to do these days, but I appreciate you all sticking around and at least tolerating, if not getting something meaningful. Okay, anyone wants to say anything? I guess we take some questions or comments now. Bhakti Rasa, is that how this goes?
Yes, if anybody has any questions, you can raise your digital hand, or any comments also.
Okay, we have Bhakti Devi.
I just want to say thank you so much, Bhakti Rasa, for hosting Jaya and exposing him to some new people, because you're right, he is amazing. I just want to say that this was a perfect class today for me. And I think, and Jaya knows me very well. He knows I'm going exactly through this. And so I'm in the same boat he is, but it's not the same exact boat. My boat is next to his because I am taking it from the Grihasta lifestyle. And I am definitely going through this cycle. And, you know, it took a little bit of beating me in the head a little bit by Jaya and my Guru Maharaj to get me to realize that I'm in the space where I'm supposed to be at this point in this whole process. It's just it's a slow process, and I find that very annoying. But I'm so grateful, you know, and he has a wonderful way of explaining it. So thank you, Jaya. Thank you so much.
Bhakti is one of my biggest fans. She always gasses me up, and I always feel very happy after I hear from Bhakti.
Thank you.
All right, Sham's got some for us, and then maybe Janava Takarani's got something for us.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for whoever organizes Sangha for letting a few of us gate crash. We weren't officially invited, but Jaya was speaking, so those of us who have no shame socially just gate crashed because we wanted to hear from Jaya. I was, you know, having seen you through both of those initiating processes that you were talking about. Oh, wait, well, yeah. I wasn't there for the first one.
All right, Sean was one of my closest friends, y'all. So he lived in the ashram with me in Chicago. He was with me when we left unceremoniously. So he's one of my closest friends. So he knows everything.
But yeah, the way you kind of processed it and explained the distinction between the first time when you joined, like when you were in Chicago and you found the SSR and then you joined, and then the second time when, we had our unceremonious departure, and then like equating the two, but saying that the difference was in one, you were ready to embrace that transformative process, and another, you weren't. And so when you weren't, it created this, like, I can't use the beautiful words you use, but you know, that sort of emotional emptiness and sort of sense of like what's happening and WTF and all of that. I was wondering, I mean, when you were speaking this, I was thinking, you know, everyone has a certain like adhikar qualification, whether it's material or spiritual, even for material activities, you know, like if you're not good at something and you try doing it, you're going to fail, right? And it seems to me that like that initial experience that you had, there was a certain level of maybe qualification or like openness to a spiritual experience, which made it very easy for you to accept all of these new things. But then in the second stage, there was required maybe some upgrade in terms of your internal qualification. Maybe, I don't know. And I also feel the same way, where like certain aspects of the initial spiritual practice were super easily embraced. Then came this phase of resistance and this like, well, who am I? And like, how do I express myself? So, but I was just thinking about it, there's really no way to kind of fake it if you don't have that qualification to accept this initiatic process, then you will go through this like WTF process. And there's no way to like psychologically or intellectually or like informationally try to, be okay with it, because the qualification is such a deeply internal thing. If you don't got it, you don't have it. And now like God's job is to like give it to you somehow. So he's putting you through this like destruction process because he wants you to upgrade, but you don't have it. And so it's going to hurt. It's like a really heavy weight at the gym. Like you can't lift it, but unless you try lifting it, you'll never lift it. So there seems to be this interesting tension there. It almost seems like the growth journeys will always be beyond us, because by definition, we have to grow. And so the experience will always be beyond our ability to digest, because otherwise, how will we ever digest it? You see what I'm saying? I'm just curious if you have any reflections on this.
My first thoughts are going to the word courage. C.S. Lewis is a nice author that that I appreciate a lot. I grew up with the Chronicles of Narnia book, and I later on rediscovered him as a Christian apologist. He wasn't always Christian; he became Christian, and as a public intellectual, he later became an apologist for Christianity. And he's written many wonderful books. One famous book is the Screw Tape Letters. Love that book. The way the book is written is like a conversation between fiends who are trying to deviate the new initiate into Christianity from Christianity. And so he talks about the sort of experiences that a new convert would experience, and how his heart, pictured as these fiends inside, will deviate him from Christianity. Super cool book. He has a very famous quote in that book that courage is not only one of the good qualities, but it's the essence of all qualities at the testing point. And courage is not only one of the virtues. I think he used the word virtue. Courage is not only one of the virtues, but the essence of all virtues at the testing point. And so it's like finding your courage again to embrace death, and finding your courage to embrace life. In the first phase, as an 18-year-old kid, I was given a very powerful ideal, an ideal of priti, and to live for the cause. And for me, it was extremely powerful because, as you know, as I tell my story many times, the very question that was vexing my 18-year-old mind is romantic love real? And I read the SSR, and Prabhupada in the last chapter, and what seems to me a clear oversight by the editors, talks about romantic love with God, engaging all the senses, including your sex life. I don't know how that made it into SSR, considering what ISKCON Sangha is, but somehow they've kept it in there all these years. It hasn't been removed. And so I get the idea that there can be a romantic dalliance with God from reading SSR. And so I have this very powerful idea as an 18-year-old. And for that ideal, I'm ready to martyr my secular life. I'm ready to put it to death. Ideals are, there was this movie, there was this movie called V for Vendetta. Really good movie. It's kind of like watching what's going on today in the movies. But he has this powerful state. There's a lot of powerful monologues from the anti-hero in the movie, really powerful monologues. But he has this one little phrase that ideals are bulletproof. So you might kill me, but an ideal is bulletproof. So I was given this bulletproof ideal about priti. And for that ideal, I was prepared to martyr my life up until that point. I was able to find my courage, is what I'm trying to say, and put to death a particular way of being and to embrace life in a new way. You fast forward to the departure from the ashram experience, and it's basically an unwilling, you lack courage. The courage also to let go. You notice this in the political field today, right versus left and all that they absolutely need each other in order to have meaning. There's I have a particular god brother. I got off of Facebook because Facebook is too ghetto, but I got off of Facebook. But when I was on Facebook, and I was participating in my own level of ghetto also. I had one particular god brother that just kept coming after me. For one whole year, he was coming after me. Most of you know who I'm talking about. He was just after me. And at one point, I used to fight with him, but at one point, I realized I was like, oh, he absolutely needs me. to find like his sense of meaning. Like that was my realization. I'm like, if I was starting to just disappear and he had no one to hate, it'd be very hard for him to like find his meaning. That's how I look at right left politics in the country. They absolutely need each other. Otherwise, they wouldn't have like a raison d'etre, like a reason for existing. And so having the courage to let go is very difficult because you lose your reason for existing when you let go. This is me trying to explain that point. So at the departure time, it becomes hard to let go of a way of being because that was your whole reason for existing and being, and now you have to let it go. It's very hard to find your courage. And so my mind goes to courage. And as a further just reflection, I don't know why I'm being inspired to bring up movies, apologies, but movies are just stories and some of them can be very powerful. My mind went to The Wizard of Oz. I don't know how. I haven't seen The Wizard of Oz in like 25 years, but my mind went to The Wizard of Oz because the archetypes in The Wizard of Oz are very interesting. You have the lion who's trying to find his courage, right? You have the Tin Man who's trying to find his heart. You have the Scarecrow who's trying to find his brain, is it? I think he's trying to find his brain. And you have Dorothy, of course, who's trying to find her home. You know, she's trying to get back to home. These are like very powerful archetypal images that speak to the unconscious world, you know? And as is relevant to your comment / question, yeah, the need to find our courage, the need to find our heart, to need to find our ability to discern what's happening, right? Because a lot of my story was in capacity for discernment. I couldn't really see what was going on until I read a book that was like magic unlocking the mind that allowed me to discern what was happening and thus drink up all the medicine that had been pending for 3 years. And then the need to find our home. You know, finally, home is not just, I don't want to say it's not a place, but it's not merely a place, but it is a type of consciousness, as we like to often articulate. And so the Wizard of Oz is like there's something that's powerful in these archetypes that's telling us about like a journey of transformation and how courage in your heart and your brain and the search for home, true home, pretty is our home. Etavan eva jignasam tattva jignasuna atmana. Right? This is the 4th verse of Srimad Bhagavatam, speaking about sadhana bhakti as a anga of the rahasya, the secret that is prema. And it says, you must certainly inquire up to this point. What point? You must investigate up until the experience of prema. That is home. And so the Wizard of Oz is coming up for me. Maybe I have to go and rewatch it now. And I'm totally speaking intuitively here. But the first thing that came up for me hearing your thing is courage. And then these sort of archetypes, the need to find our courage, our heart, our desire for home, our capacity for discernment, etc. That's the best I got. I'm speaking totally intuitively here. Today, Sangha is, because my faculties are in the dark phase, so my methodicalness is not on point right now. I'm speaking from a little bit from the heart. You have to receive it to the heart, you know, receive it intuitively. Okay, we got a few other things here. I think Janava Takarani, maybe, Pranahari, Bhakti Yoga DC, and then maybe we close it out. We can read some of the chats. I don't want to keep people too long.
Hare Krishna, Jai, how are you? Hare Krishna, everyone. So my question was based on the topic where it intrigued my curiosity was when we said that soul and psyche are having that dialogue and the dance. So I was questioning we said soul is a Shakti, right? And I was thinking about the Tathastha Shakti. So we are living entities, the Jivas. So when we are going through this phase, what is shedding? The body is shedding those psychoanalysis fears, or is the soul going through a true ego transformation process from false ego?
Yeah, if you have to talk about it in a very sort of technical way, you would say the soul is witnessing the ego going through stages of transformation. One of the characteristics of the jiva, as we learn from Shastra, is avikari, that it doesn't change. In the sense that nature goes through 6 types of transformations: birth, growth, producing byproducts, wasting some time, dwindling, and then death. These are sort of transformations of external nature, also of internal nature, or internal phenomena. But the jiva is kind of just a witness of that as an unchanging, ontological reality that witnesses that. That's how we would talk about it technically. Technically doesn't really touch the heart, but again, technical explanations are useful in creating a little bit of distance so that we don't lose our souls to externals. So this is the value of like a technical explanation. Again, because the soul is tadatmic with the body, as I said, you don't know where body ends and psyche and soul begins. Just like on an experiential level, although the soul is technically the witness of that process of the ego shedding, it for the soul, it feels like it's happening to her, and let's say perhaps this is a little bit of an intuitive point. For the soul, it's like a betrayal. Try to imagine the soul, who's eternal, is looking for something eternal, and she's been given a body that she's kind of invested a lot in, and that body is now betraying her, or at least she may feel that again it is happening. I've invested so much, and again I'm being betrayed. Again, it's failing me in so many ways, et cetera, et cetera. This is me putting a story around some technical points. So as far as the experience of it, it's like it's happening to you. It's definitely happening to you. I'm the one going through that. No one else is going, otherwise the body psyche is not even conscious. And so you can say technically I'm apart from it, but you're tadatmic with it. So it is really you, her, the soul that's experiencing this. And it's tremendous. In some ways, this is why we reach for a siddha deha, like a body that will not betray us. That will not, that it's a body that's composed of love, and it exists for love, and it dances with love and God and others who are lovers in this way. Where ultimately it's like she's looking for that. And so, like I said, technically you can say it's the ego, but that doesn't really mean anything on a personal level. It's you, the soul, she who's going through that. So that's the best I got. That's like the full answer that I have right now.
Thank you. That really helps, because you also mentioned about the place in consciousness to finding home, and that takes courage. That helps. Yes.
Okay. All right. Maybe Pranahari and Bhakti Yoga Disi. I don't want to like arrest the atmosphere. Is that okay, Bhakti Rasa? I want to ask permission first. Okay.
Hey Jai,
Okay.
Hare Krishna.
Yeah, Hannah.
Is it my turn? Oh, so yeah, I just wanted to reflect based off what you said to Harisham's question about how our ideal, I guess I was thinking like the ideal of priti, which we obtain as devotees, aspiring Vaishnavas, and then when we have to go through another ego death, whatever's attached to that, which is kind of superfluous to attaining that ideal, it's like a refinement. Actually, the next iteration of or cycle, I that's how I'm looking at it and feeling that to actually attain that ideal, to actually move closer to that ideal, whether it be this life or many lives, there has to be this cycle. But it's so traumatic for one, because they've attached so many other superfluous things to this ideal. So they feel like I've given up everything for this ideal, but there's no other ideal which is going to woo me over. So the death of that ideal, or the appearance of that, seems extremely traumatic, even more traumatic. And that's why it's like it's much more difficult, I guess, for the aspiring Vaishnav to kind of make it through that dark phase. Or maybe it takes longer, it takes a lot more guidance and help. But certainly I am seeing it more as like a refinement, that we don't have all the tools, and we kind of need to go over here to get something that's needed on the journey to Priti, or we need to drop something that you can't bring with you. And so that understanding which you've presented in that light as like a refinement of that ideal, and not what we kind of internally, or we feel that on some level that, oh, we're giving up our highest ideal. It helps us to, I guess, stabilize and maybe get through it more quickly. So just appreciating hearing this topic over the course of weeks, months from you and others. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Prana. I want to just say, I've discovered a language that I like, that idolatry. Idolatry is when you invest the finite with the glory of the infinite. And, you know, idolatry, it can happen with objects or people and relationships. That often happens in this way. But also concepts. We worship our concepts, perhaps more than anything else. And we don't like to be told that we're wrong. We don't like to be challenged. Oh my God, I have a funny thought that's not funny, but it is kind of funny because it's kind of the birth of the Sangha. But like, even like in Padmanabha Swami's journey that has been very public, unfortunately, it's about iconoclasm and perhaps on like a fundamental scale. People had certain idols that were like challenged. Their concepts were challenged. And Maharaj's books and, you know, confident speaking was like iconoclasm. And you've smashed someone's idol and it's intolerable. So yeah, the process of nature, if you think of it like a crucible that's refining us. Oh, you have this ideal of love, but the way that you conceive of it now is an idol. It's not actually her full glory. It's actually a restriction on her full glory. And so it needs to be refined. So I need to take you to this journey. And yeah, as you said, that loss of the ideal it's not really a loss of the ideal, it's a refinement of it. But again, you don't necessarily perceive it as such initially. And so certainly that could be utterly devastating. Therefore, the need for the circle, you know, of friends showering down love through their songs and through their consoling words, and protecting us from the numinous experience of the shattering of our idols, which will be many along the way. We have many of those. So I just wanted to reflect that. Okay, Alexander, maybe your last hand. I see Bhakti Yoga DC left.
Yeah, so what I wanted to reflect basically will echo this, because the iconoclasm, we've had this discussion before where you were saying it's like world breaking, that metaphor with the bird who's like breaking out of the egg, and it's like breaking a world and it's flying to God. So I think like this knowledge of this circle and this natural process is so important in devotional communities, because otherwise the journey becomes almost unwalkable. Like for me, just in the journey of my own Krishna consciousness, of being in this journey, it's like I've invested my identity and like my sense of like safety in this one particular idol, in this one particular world or representation of the conceptual framework of Krishna consciousness. So when through the natural process, like that's no longer cutting it, because in order to actually experience that reality, I have to go beyond my map of it, or my like just like conception of it. So it's natural that I would have to leave that behind, but I'm so attached to it because it's just like anything else is unsafe. And so then it creates that resistance to the process, and just like, yeah, that deformation can start to happen. So yeah, I think just like this knowledge is like, yeah, game changing. And thank you so much for helping me through this.
Thank you. I agree. Yeah, the image of the circle has been impressed in my psyche since 2019. It's been the basis of everything that I've done after that, or the way that I think to articulate Krishna consciousness. It's literally based on this one image of the circle inside the psyche. I want to share, Bhakti Rasa is sharing here nicely just to this point. Loss of ideals need to be grieved as other things that die. And yeah, that's the experience about the glass darkly. Like a huge part of the ethic when you're in the dissolution world is grief. And I can speak to myself. It's something that I didn't know how to do. And like, even after getting the language, I leave unceremoniously. That's like totally worthy of grief. But I wanted to face it like a boss, So a boss meant you didn't cry. Like, if your mom dies, you don't cry. Then you're like on boss level. That's how we kind of grew up in the Christian conscious movement. If like people who are near and dear to you die and you don't cry, you on a boss level. Like, you're probably Jivan Mukta. We had these sorts of terrible images growing up in the Hare Krishna movement. And so, yeah, to experience something so devastating and to like be without grief was like somehow a flex. And basically, it's just like you're totally cut off from your emotional world. That's been my experience. So even in 2019, as I started to get the language that unlocked a lot of the magic, I still wasn't able to grieve. I didn't realize that this phase of life, the dissolution phase, actually requires the ethic of like grieving, like putting to rest. It wasn't until about 2021 I would meet Tamal. You guys, most of you here know Tamal, and he has a prayer course. So in the prayer course, he's divided the prayer course into four doors. And the first door is just like glorifying God. And it's related to the earth element. It's like the foundation. And the second door was the humility door, related to heaven and like water element. So at that door, you were intended to be like, tears were considered to be the proof that grace has allowed you to walk through that door. And I remember during the course, I was like, I'm not going to pass through this door. I don't cry. Like, I don't cry. I can literally count on one hand how many times I've cried in the last decade. And of course, I did the course. I didn't get through that door at all. But I was really concerned about it and working on it. And it wasn't until the 2 years after that, so 2022, 23, I started to cry a lot. And as I was able to like unlock a certain of those emotions, then the whole thing opened up. And then I was able to, and then I had the realization, I was like, oh, I forgot to grieve. And that's also part of like the process of letting go and allowing, it's like the tears of your grief is part of the water that will allow for the generation of new life. And if you don't grieve, it's like you're holding on to death still. You're not able to grow. So I just wanted to echo and amplify Bhakti Rasa's comment here. Like, the loss of ideals need to be grieved as other things that die. And yeah, I just find that to just be a very important element of the ethic when you're in like the dissolution world. Like, it's okay to not know. That's one thing I spoke to, but also part of that, it's like grieving, like, oh man, things are rough right now. I want to thank you all for tolerating me this morning. It wasn't the most methodical, but I think it was heartfelt. I did come from the heart. I hope it was received to the heart. I did the best I could. The new audience and so many respected people in the Sangha right now. So thank you all so much for the company and for hearing me and receiving this class.
Yeah.
Bhakti Rasa, I don't know if you want to say anything final.
I do. Just a few concluding words. Thank you very much, Jai, for really living in 3D what it is you bring, because it's not just words, it's experience, and that's what makes it powerful. Is that you're not just intellectualizing something. Your words come through the fire of ordeal, so they're very potent and transformative. So yes, I'm very thankful that you took the chance, you stepped out on the limb and brought this to us. It's filled with hope. It's filled with healing and the potential of going forward with confidence. And when these things come up, to know I'm not broken beyond repair. This is actually a good sign. I'm falling apart and it's awesome.
Yes, that is the message.
Thank you for all of that. And thank you very much, everybody, for joining in. I really appreciate each of you being here. Without you, it wouldn't have been the same thing. So thank you very much, and we will adjourn here. And
Radhe Shyam.